Welcome to another webinar produced by CX of M Radio. We're really excited today to have Bob Azman and Lou Carbone, both hosts on the CX of M Radio network, to discuss an important topic, which we'll get into shortly. I just wanted to review our agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about CX of M Radio, give you an idea of who we are and what we do. And then we're going to jump right into the program, which came about through a discussion between Bob and Lou. And we want to bring them in to share that out a little bit about understanding the X's and why the experience has become so fragmented, as well as what we need to do to create distinctive experiences through the support of open-minded people in your organization. So welcome. I'm Tom DeWitt. I'm the president of CX of M, which is Michigan's Association of Customer Experience Management Specialists. It's our mission to create a dynamic and collaborative community amongst the CX profession, and CX of M Radio is just one of those instruments that we do it. So welcome here. We're really proud of the fact that we presently have 8 podcasts, and shortly we'll have a 9th podcast joining the CX of M Radio network, covering a broad range of topics. And these webinars are designed to feature our podcasters around important discussions that we need to have amongst the customer experience management community. So welcome to the webinar, Bob and Lou, and thanks for giving up your time to be here today.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Tom. Good to be here.
So let's start the discussion here a little bit with a word cloud. I'm going to ask Olivia, our support specialist, to share out a word cloud in Menti. And I want you to give a little thought in a few words. What do the X's mean to you, without a whole lot of clarification on our part? So we see a lot of X's, whether it's UX, CX, EX. What do the X's mean to you as an audience? So please enter your response. Interesting. Mental models, just experience. So feeling or emotion. Okay, great. Human centricity. So we're talking about different constituents or different experiences and what they're going through as human beings. Mental models, that's kind of an interesting addition. We'd love to hear more about that. And I assume the mental framework that each one of these individuals that's going through the experience is going through. Okay. So let's leave the word cloud now. Let's jump into the use of our chat here, or Q&A, for you to leave a response for the following question. So our panelists, you have some idea of what X means to our participants today, but I'd like you to use the Q&A feature to enter your response to the following question. So what happened to experience, and why has it been abbreviated to X rather than beginning with E, which actually is how experience is spelled? So how did we get where we are? So if you could just enter those responses in the Q&A or chat, and I can share those a little bit with our panelists, and we can talk about that a little bit. Okay, good. So I've got a few responses here. So, okay, interesting. So, Darren, you feel E would have been too broad. And I've got Heather seems to think it had more to do with marketing purposes, which certainly, you know, you have to admit that the use of X has certainly brought experiences to the forefront, and it's allowed people to reimagine in their space what the experience is, whether it's user experience, employee experience, or customer experience. So let me refer to the panelists here. So what are your guys' thoughts on this? And why did you choose to raise this question?
If you don't mind, I'll start, Bob, with I believe that experience is a mental model. It's something that takes place in our heads between our ears. And that what we tried to do is turn understanding that mental model, those processes that take place that create an impression, and begin to look at process versus looking at the science that's underneath all of the processes that are going on, which is literally experience and experience management. And that's the common denominator. But I do believe that it was marketing that drove us away from a base understanding of human experience that could be applied across the board. And with the rapid growth of this space, what we abandoned were the basic principles that underlie every experience. And when I begin to think about every experience, just to take something from Einstein, for every reaction, there's an equal reaction. Well, in the world of experience, for every action and non-action, there are a set of responses. And those are trying to understand how the mind works. And that applies across all aspects. So I think what happened was, as a result of marketing, we got into specific silos and process silos that really ignored the depth of knowledge that could be applied across the broad spectrum.
Just to tag on to that, Lou, I wonder if we tried to fit customer experience into our established organizational design. And so to your point about silos, is what silo did it fit in? So we were trying to take customer experience, which is relatively new in the whole organizational process theme, and we tried to fit it into established organizational structure. And yet it cuts across all organization structure. It cuts across marketing and sales and operations, et cetera. And so I just wonder, and as I reflect on this, is did we try to fit it in to establish structures instead of looking at it differently, to your point?
I absolutely believe so, because if you look at the difference between the quality movement, people wanted to understand what quality was. And you didn't have customer quality, you didn't have product quality, you didn't have service quality. What you had was a base understanding of the principles of quality and managing quality in any spectrum. And I think that's what led to the proliferation of approaches without a base understanding and a common denominator underneath the work that's going on today. So what we have is this fragmentation and this literal compound. I'd hoped it was a mixture at one time rather than a compound, but it's a compound or amalgamation of different perspectives all over the board in the world of experience management.
So I got a question for both of you. Aren't all these additional experience just a subset of ultimately what is the customer experience? I mean, even the employee experience, the reason we're studying it and working on it is because ultimately that impacts the customer experience. Isn't that so? And why aren't we looking at it in that regard?
I think that understanding the management of experience is so broad that it affects personal relationship, that it affects our lives, that it's a much broader scientific concept that then you begin to take down into channels. I think the problem is that customer experience and now trying to fuse employee experience with it, it's a no-brainer. People will ask, the two is equally important. Well, of course they are. But what is it that's common in an approach or an understanding of human dynamics? So I think that from a marketing perspective, it was very, there's nothing that's grown as fast as this. I mean, if you look at the quality movement and the curve for adoption of the quality movement, and I shouldn't be talking like this because it's taken 30 years for me to see this happen, but this is more of a hockey stick compared to other movements that take place. And I think it was primarily driven by money. I mean, when you have companies that are being sold for billions of dollars, it was a marketing ploy for organizations to sell versus the creation of a discipline in some ways.
Tom, I'd add too that just a little bit of my evolution of thinking around this. 25 years ago, I remember having a banner. I was running customer service operations for a large company, and I had a banner that said, "Happy employees equal happy customers." And then we evolved in that, and with employee experience being and really employee engagement being so at the forefront now, I started to say to myself, maybe that minimizes maybe we shouldn't be saying it that simply, happy employees equal happy customers. Maybe that minimizes how important employee experience is. And now I've kind of come full circle and said, but that's really what it's all about. And that is the entire experience. Why do we insist on trying to separate the two? Why they are linked in forever together. You cannot deliver services and products without human centricity, which was in our word cloud. So I just think I've come full circle where I just think you can't separate them. They have to be thought of as one, and you have to work on both simultaneously to be successful.
But to that point, Bob, don't you think organizations oversimplify that? Don't you think some companies embrace that equation and maybe oversimplify the employee happiness side of the equation?
Well, that's interesting, Tom, because my reaction, short answer is yes, but I might also say at the same time, you have on the other end of the spectrum, they're overcomplicating it. You know, instead of running personnel surveys, why don't you just ask your employees directly what's going on? How do you feel? How are you feeling today? What can we do better? I always remember the story of running a personnel survey. You can tell I'm not a big fan of personnel surveys, but I always remember running this personnel survey for a very large company that I worked for, and the results came back, and one of the questions in there was, do you believe ABC company is a customer-focused company? And all the other departments were getting 80s and 90% ratings, but my department was customer service, and we were in the 30s. And so the CEO called me up and said, well, we apparently have a leadership problem on our hands. It's like, I think that means me, first of all. And then secondly, I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, everybody else says we're customer focused, but you're in customer service and your people don't say we're customer focused. I said, because our people are on the front lines and they're seeing all of the, the scars that we have, all of the terrible policies, all of the terrible practices. And so they don't think we're customer focused. And so go ahead.
No, they're seeing how the rest of you guys are screwing up, right?
Right.
Basically what you're saying, right? Wow.
Exactly. And so we didn't have to do a personnel survey to find that out. We just needed to ask those frontline employees and say, what can we do better?
I think that what is so interesting is how siloed organizations can get. And back when Microsoft did conferences that were called Mix, I did 2 Mix conferences, and there were like 200 speakers. And I actually spoke to the total experience for all these developers developing websites at the time. from that, I was engaged by Microsoft to travel around the globe to Australia, to New Zealand, Dublin, and spoke at the next conference because it was talking about basic human experience and how it applies no matter whether it's online, whether, there's certain distinctions in terms of the clues that you can embed in the way that you develop it. But it is all about human experience. And as Bob pointed out, what could be more human than being, I hate to say this, captured inside an organization as an employee? I'm even captured in my own small business. There's some mornings that you wake up and you say, how do you feel about yourself? And it's really how the organization causes you to feel about yourself each day. Do I feel worthwhile? Do I feel integrated? Do I feel connected? Emotions and feelings exist across the broad spectrum of experiences. And I just somewhat disappointed, but don't think it's too late to break down some of these barriers and make human experience, or experience that we've been talking about for 3 decades, in terms of it's about human emotion. It's about human experiences. It isn't about process. And I think that often there's a trap of falling into processes. And I was talking to Bob this morning, and at one point, in some conversations that we had, we talked about actually degrees in experience management at the U, and also at the Pratt School on human experience. And when we talked about that, even supply chain has an experience. I mean, we're experiencing the result of the actions and non-actions in the supply chain are affecting the experiences that we have. So even supply chain is in the business of experience. If you paid for gas, every time I hit that pump, anger comes up. That's an emotion, and it's created by supply chain.
So I've got a question for both of you. Do you think part of the problem about this, and I know we're kind of stuck here talking about employee experience and customer experience, but do you think part of the problem is that managers aren't being held accountable for their employees' experience or the level of employee engagement? And perhaps if there was greater accountability there and a greater understanding of how a positive employee experience and positive employee engagement relates to positive customer outcomes. Is that one of the issues? Do you think maybe in some organizations they kind of figure, well, employee satisfaction or engagement, that's an HR issue? Is it part of the silo effect?
Oh, I think that silo effect is affected by the command and control model that is in operation from the industrial age, and that it's very hard for an organization to work bottom up and say, what is it that Lou Carbone, who is working, I guess right now there's a big strike in a bourbon factory in Kentucky. I would enjoy working in a bourbon factory no matter what, I think, but we don't look at starting from the bottom up. We're still caught in the industrial age, which is a very hierarchical. If you look at most of the CX programs where people are complaining, it's, I can't get upper management's attention. Shouldn't have to be struggling for that in a world that's experience driven versus a world that's process and command and control driven, which are the markings of staying in the industrial age versus moving to the age of experience management as a value proposition.
Tom, interesting question you ask, because for as long as I can remember, as a senior executive, I sat in meetings where we said middle level managers are the biggest barrier we have to executing any program that we get involved with. And so for me, I think when you ask about accountability for managers, I think our gap sometimes is we don't help our managers and work with them on what behaviors we want them to utilize and to change as a result of what we're trying to do. We train skills. I just don't think we train behaviors. And so as a result, we say to managers, their middle managers, they're our barrier. We can't implement the program because they're not doing what we told them to do. But I think the challenge we have is that we may not be giving them the behaviors that have changed from today to tomorrow. And I see that with implementation with customer experience programs a lot too, where we train skills really well, but we don't train isn't the word. We don't coach behaviors, and then we complain when people don't do what we want them to do.
Exactly. Bob, you use such a great word in the word accountability, that moving from a command and control model to having people feel accountable for the end result and accepting that responsibility. I think it was Fernando Flores, who's written an awful lot of, an academician who's written an awful lot about accountability and assigning accountability or self-accountability in an organization. And I don't think there's a lot of self-accountability. There's a lot of accountability to others versus, and it's that moving up that chain of command. And they may say, I want an NPS score. And then you're accountable for an NPS score when the real critical factor is what are we doing experientially to create distinctive value.
Hey, Lou, I want to follow up too on something you said, and I've been kind of reflecting on this as well. When it comes to customer experience, you talked about the hockey stick growth, but sometimes don't you think we've done all of this already? Isn't journey mapping, process reengineering, isn't emotional, isn't EQ something we've talked about for years, and now all of a sudden we've found the light and we're incorporating it into customer experience? It's like, wait a minute, are we putting a different label on this that really is something we've been working on for years?
Absolutely. And this is where I feel that the world of unconscious thought, the world of developing organizations that are much more adaptable versus pivoting, that can move with the flow of the marketplace, that understand that value is created customer back, but what the tools that we're using are ancient tools, that understanding deep unconscious thought about how someone feels about their work. And studies that we've done in one organization, what we found is what senior executives said on a typical survey versus a survey that started with, what are your thoughts and feelings working here? And then analyzing that on a basis of what was unconsciously said, it was the opposite of what they said in a traditional survey. That there are these hidden emotions that we don't even know we have, and we create intellectual answers to emotions that are much more difficult. So I absolutely agree. I think that there's so much relabeling, Bob. I love that. Surveys are surveys, and they're not customer experience management systems in and of themselves. Customer experience management systems are a mindset versus a tool.
And so, Lou, we have another one of these situations on our hands right now with the labeling, and it's called customer success. Everywhere we look now, it's customer success. And is it the replacement for the chief experience officer? Is now the chief customer officer? Are salespeople now called customer success managers? What's that whole evolution happening with success? It feels like success and experience are headed towards, if they already haven't collided, they're about to collide.
Oh, absolutely. And I think we can look at a case study that existed with IBM calling sales reps marketing representatives 50 years ago. And that corrupted whatever the concept of marketing was. that marketing was more strategic, and all of a sudden marketing got leveled to communication. And I think today there's still difficulty understanding what the role of marketing is in organizations today. So this relabeling of customer success in what? In accomplishing a job and looking at what a customer does as a job? I'm very, very concerned that what we continue to do is rehash old thinking versus the ability to create new and dynamic thought processes and tools that fit what we've learned in neuroscience and psychology, and the fact that people have feelings and emotions, that they create intellectual alibis for the things that they do. That's very different than let's make Lou his process frictionless. It's, yeah, you can make it frictionless, but you can make it so frictionless that I really don't give a damn. And we saw that in the car rental business with speed, and literally moved it so fast. When I was in the car rental business, you'd check out with a security guard, and we're still training counter agents. And the person you encountered was a security guard. It's the lack of understanding that there's dynamic change in value creation when you begin to think of the experience. And I just think that we're so comfortable doing the things that we've always done, that the challenges put forth to look at new tools, look at new processes is a hindrance, because people are comfortable doing what they've always done and yet expect different results, which I think was defined as insanity. I'm not sure.
I
Well,
think that's
well,
true.
Gentlemen, this has been really stimulating. I want to move along in the program a little bit here. I'm going to ask Olivia to pull a poll up that we're going to have our audience participate in. So how many X's are you aware of that are dealt with in your organization? How many X's are you aware of that are dealt with in your organization? So we'll give our give them a few minutes to get that done. And Olivia, there we go. Oh, 2. Okay. Well, it's not as bad as we thought. 2 seems about as many as 4. Bob and Lou, let me pose this question to you. What's causing this fragmentation? Why are we seeing so many X's? We talked about marketing, explaining DX, but what's causing?
I think it's whack-a-mole to a degree, that organizations either see another organization talking about customer experience, and all of a sudden, wow, we need that, or then all of a sudden employee experience comes up and we need to hit that. User experience comes up, we need to hit that. And I think that they're all important, and I think there are experiences that are undiscovered within organizations, such as supply chain. It's an experience. How do people feel along that supply chain? So I think that we're going to see probably there are more X's that are hidden, but I think that experience is the common factor. And what are the tools and elements that deal with emotion and unconscious thought that we're bringing forth that begin to work alongside or replace, in some instances, tools that have existed, as Bob said, they've been around forever and ever and just get relabeled. And it's the bane of marketing and bane of organizations in consultative businesses to try to segment. And I think that it's the organizations that are selling to the larger organizations that are literally doing a disservice to a degree by having so many splintered elements and so many splintered elements in an organization.
I think it's a real dynamic that we're facing as a profession, Tom, with this fragmentation. Take, for example, the PMP, project management certification. Look at, Six Sigma and green belts and black belts. You know, you don't have people coming out with plastic belts and leather belts. You know, you're either a black belt or a green belt or a white belt or yellow belt. I mean, there's a set of colors, and that's what you are, right? And yet in the CX profession, for some reason, you know, the Customer Experience Professional Association brought out its certified customer experience professional certification, but now we're seeing multiple certifications around the world. And so you have to question to yourself is, you know, is the source of that because everybody thinks this is a hot topic right now, so let's jump on the certification bandwagon?
Absolutely.
And is that really healthy, and is that sustainable as a profession? I mean, Darren probably has similar experiences in the UX world, but I think that's, you know, probably some of our biggest challenges is that it's so hot that everybody's jumping on the bandwagon, and yet, you know, is there a North Star for us? Is there as a profession that we have to focus on and say, this is a true CX professional, this is the certification we expect to have, you know, these are the experiences and so forth.
So I am getting a sense from the audience that certifications are out of control. I know it's a little off topic, but how do we lend some credibility to the certification process if there is so much demand?
Well, I'm inherently biased as the emeritus chair of the Customer Experience Professional Association. I believe the CXPA has done a lot. It was the first certification program. I think they've done a lot of work in job descriptions and job profiles and defining those, what those look like within an organization. So there's been definitive qualifications and skills required. So I think the CXPA has advanced that significantly. I think that perhaps they might have lagged in the global approach, but I think they're making up for lost time there from a global standpoint. But I think we need a professional association like the CXPA to drive this and at the same time, as more organizations require certifications of the CX professionals they're hiring, what certification they require can have an impact as well. I'll defer to Lou for additional comments.
I think what is interesting is the lack of fusion of academic elements with the world that we live in companies. And where we saw great success in the quality movement was the fusion of academic knowledge into the marketplace. And I've co-authored about 18 academic articles that have been with Len Berry and folks like that. And I just watched the number of citations by week that keep rising, but they're all in academic papers. And unfortunately, there's so much noise, and the ability to publish a book today and self-publish a book and pose as an expert, I'm just amazed. When I realized what I went through to try to get a book published through Prentice Hall in the old days, you had to jump through hoops. There was a board of review, there was peer review. In fact, what was the most exciting and the reason that Prentice Hall moved on the book that I wrote was that Phil Kotler talked about it as the future of management in a peer review and the future of marketing. But I think that it's the absence of this cross-pollination that took place during the quality movement with Deming and Duran and others that really set the stage for new learning. And I just don't feel that new learning is being embraced from academic papers. And I try to read most of the citations, but they're in all different languages. I can't read Turkish and some of the other stuff.
Well, I'm sure you're popular all around the world, Lou.
I don't know. I don't know about popular, controversial.
Well, that's
The challenge is, I think, to Lou's point, is that we like the top 10 lists, right? Top 10 ways to improve your CX in 10 minutes. Top 10 ways to address your employee experience. To some extent, we want that silver bullet, that, that perfect recipe, that just do these 10 things and everything's going to be better. And it's enormously more complicated than that. And yet these books that Lou is talking about are really built around that concept of, if you just do these 10 things, all will be well. And unfortunately, professionals and organizations are finding that it's a lot more difficult than that.
I think that what I fear is the homogeneity of experience. If it's boiled down to this simple, when I say simple, it is very, very simple. It is so simple that we've made it so complex. And that's what's so crazy. But I begin to look at some of the dynamic things that I've seen in UX. There was a luggage company that was Rimowa, where you could actually walk around in the showroom, pick a piece of luggage, open the luggage. Their value as an organization grew like crazy as the luxury brand, and Louis Vuitton, or the company that owns Vuitton, bought Rimowa. I think that there's all of these experiences come together. It wasn't just the product, it was everything about the way they thought about innovation. Even that 20 years ago, being able to walk virtually into a showroom was really advanced technology that reinforced my purchase decision of buying a piece of Rimowa luggage when I would search for pricing.
So, gentlemen, I'd like to move the program along a little bit here. I'm going to have Olivia share another poll for the audience. I'd like to have a little discussion around fixing problems or creating distinctive problems. So, audience, tell me, is your organization more focused on just fixing problems or creating distinctive experiences? Oh, okay. Well, it appears that our audience members seem to be on the right track, gentlemen, but you obviously perceive a problem out there with just fixing problems rather than creating distinctive experiences. What's your take on it?
I would pose the question slightly differently, because I think that their organizations are focused on creating distinctive experiences. Rather than your organization, I would ask, is our organizations focused more on just fixing problems versus creating distinctive experiences?
Well, we can't change the question now, but
but I guess I don't know. I think there's a difference, because I do believe that the people in our audience, because we have such an intimate,
so you obviously, Lou, you're the opinion that most organizations are focused on fixing problems rather than distinctive experiences. Why do you feel that way, and what's the problem with that?
Oh, absolutely. If you think about a case study that I'll use often, which is Progressive Auto Insurance, what they did is they really dealt with creating distinctive value in an experience. When they created the instant response vehicles that showed up at the scene of an accident, the construct of accident forgiveness, all of these things that dealt with emotional reciprocity as well as financial reciprocity, created distinctive value that created the fastest growing, and going online, being the first online insurance company, created distinctive value that they had been rewarded for as the most profitable and fastest growing auto insurer in the country. And now they've broadened that to motorcycles, motorhomes, your own home. And I think that other organizations, and I've seen them, will say, okay, how do we handle calls into the call center better when a claim comes in? To me, that's fixing broken. To me, that's not creating distinctive value. I think that what I see at Delta unconsciously of late, I see Delta as more valuable to me emotionally and my connection to Delta, understanding me. And Tom, I think we heard the example of just simply passing out a simple clue. The Purell packet has so much more meaning than just handing me a Purell packet. It's that hidden unconscious thought that these people are definitely concerned about the COVID situation, and this plane is probably cleaner than others.
So, so Bob, I think the kind of the standard approach in customer experience management often is to map out a customer journey, identify pain points, and zero in on those and fix them. What are the pros and cons of that?
And meanwhile, Rome is burning, Tom. Meaning that, again, going back to, are we overcomplicating it? As an organization, I bet if we said to our employees, what's wrong? What are the pain points? They could tell us, we could have the top 3 pain points within a day and get them fixed within weeks. And so I'm not advocating for the journey mapping process and so forth. But what I'm saying is that let's apply these techniques at the appropriate time. If your customer experience is poor right now, and your customer retention is dropping, and you're having issues with product quality, et cetera, and the overall experience is not working, you better find out what's going on quickly and solve the immediate burning platform issues that you have. Then once you've got the ship stable, then let's go into these more broader strategic techniques that we use to now say, okay, now let's look at the entire experience. And so I've just been involved with or working with so many organizations that have these burning platforms, and they're trying to fix it overnight. And that's where journey mapping and so forth can come in the long term. And long term doesn't mean years. I just mean it takes a little bit longer to do that. But don't overlook the fact that you know what's wrong, so go fix it. And what's preventing you from fixing it? And I think there is where you can, again, focus on what is really a significant pain point, get some quick wins, get some momentum going, and then start this journey and use these techniques that we use very successfully to now create sustainable long-term improvement in the experience.
So, Tom, when back almost more than 3 decades now, when Juan Carlson from Scandinavian Airlines talked about moments of truth, and Paco Underhill was doing his work with cameras, we started doing journey mapping where we would bring customers into a supermarket, have them walk through all the way from the street, taking pictures, moving forward 3 steps at a time, picture to the left, picture to the right, picture center. We then put these on butcher paper and moved these along the halls of an advertising agency and had this whole stream. And then customers would mark what they were feeling at the moment that they experienced each of those steps. We then did the very same thing with employees and then laid the 2 together and built an experience design from that and what emotions people were feeling, what they noticed. And what they noticed were weeds growing in the sign, and the manager would walk into that supermarket every day and never see the weeds growing in the sign. And that was a very laborious way of doing journey mapping, and it was primitive journey mapping. But I think that what's lacking is that today we've brought journey mapping down to a point where it isn't experiential, it's more process driven.
So let me shift the discussion a little bit now as we get closer to the end. Let's talk about at the organizational level and the importance of having open-minded people. So what are your guys' take on the need for and where open-minded people are in the organization who can determine the success or failure of experience initiatives?
Bob,
Well, I hear it all the time. We don't, and Lou mentioned it earlier, we don't have CEO support. And therefore we can't be successful. And I'm sorry, I don't buy that argument. I've seen it where leaders at various levels within an organization have said, look, things are really bad. I can't get the CEO's attention. She's focused on other things, so I'm going to go do X, and they do it. And it's within their department. They go grab some colleagues that share their passion in other departments, and they start fixing things that are going wrong and improving experiences. And so, yes, does having CEO support help? Absolutely, no question about it. It can drive investments. It can, clear barriers and pathways for better process or better improvements of the customer experience. But if you don't have it, just throwing up your arms and saying, well, I don't have it, so I can't get anything done. That's why CX professionals' average tenure in their job is 18 to 24 months. That's not very impressive.
No, I think that it's really time to cut the crap and throw away the wine list. And I spell wine W-H-I-N-E. That I'm so sick and tired of the whining. It's get up and just do it. Do it. I watched this happen years ago, where the intellectual arguments and statistics for a CEO at a car rental company, he finally put his head and shoulders on the table and he goes, I don't understand what the hell you guys are talking about and what you want to do, but just damn it, go ahead and do it at Newark Airport. So we created this experience at Newark Airport, and he felt this was a low cost. How can let me just get you out of my hair talking about this stuff and quit trying to convert the whole organization with all of this data, all of this statistics, all of this stuff. 5 months later, at their annual convention, he stood up with a letter from a CEO of a company that said, I don't know what you've done at Newark, but if you were to do this everywhere else in the US, the experience is so phenomenal, I would move you to our preferential car rental company. I just happened upon Newark. And he holds this letter up and he goes, we're rolling this out to 68 cities that represent 85% of our business today. And it was like, he didn't even know what he was rolling out. He didn't care. And I think that what we forget is that we make decisions emotionally, and yet we're trying to convince executives on an intellectual basis, and forget that we make decisions emotionally first. So my advice is basically just damn do it, get some wins, and demonstrate the power of what can be done with experience management.
So let's close out our discussion today on a few things. Lou, you brought up the wine list. Love that. What are some practical takeaways that our guests can bring with them to address the questions that we've raised today in their organization?
Well, I think one of the things is I would love to see organizations create leaders that, if they are splintered, that come together to work on common practices, so that if there's a CX group, there's that we're continuing to separate these. We're arguing on where they belong. We have one client that actually put HR into the marketing department in a restaurant restaurant service business, because employees are the greatest marketing asset. I think we need to begin to rethink how we come together in organizations. And I would basically say that that if there were 3 splintered groups working on experience, how do they come together and how do they use common processes and then distinctive processes as it relates to the area of specialization. But what are the common principles that lie beneath it that are emotional, that are unconscious? How do we begin to unearth more than what the industrial age has taught us, which is survey and fix broken?
I think I'd add, Tom, to that, bring your customers into the discussion. And I don't mean through surveys or NPS scores, actually bring them into the discussion. I think oftentimes organizations are nervous about, well, if I tell my customer that we're trying to improve our experience, they'll think that they're dealing with a company that isn't very good. And quite I've seen, my experience has been quite the opposite happens. Customers are impressed by the fact that you're trying to improve and that you're bringing them into the process and seeking out their input and advice. And so, you know, maybe the term I'm looking for is collaboration. Bring your employees and your customers and your leadership into the process, and I think you'll see some real significant changes as you collaborate with those key stakeholders and start moving the ball in a direction. I think that's a key takeaway. The second thing I might add to that too is that this whole concept that we're talking about around quick wins, don't overlook that in terms of it's an ability to really drive home success. And look, if we're standing in front of a board of directors trying to get $1 million investment, they're going to want some assurance that they're going to get payback on the money that they're investing as on behalf of the shareholders. And so in those cases, I think if you can prove that, hey, we tried this, it worked, and then we're advancing it, I think it goes a long way to justify future investments, either human investments or capital investments.
So are you saying every organization should have their Newark Airport example?
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy. I think it's a great analogy.
I think the other thing that would be interesting is I would love to see organizations create collaboratories that literally bring the people that are responsible for these fragmented pieces and employees into what is a basic laboratory, the ability to work and create deeper understanding on a deeper level than just traditional surveys, and the application and rapid deployment within an organization of creating greater distinctive value.
So who should be in those collaboratories, Lou?
Head of CX, head of HR, or if there's an employee experience director, whatever those areas are. Bill Stakos, who many of you know, made a comment the other day that his advice to people is the first two people to invite when you join a company in the customer experience space is the CXO and the HR individual. And I think these are the people that belong in a collaboratory where you're collaborating and understanding experience on a different level and deploying it and learning from each other rather than having those siloed situations.
So to Bob's point, though, shouldn't we also have customers in the room and even frontline employees? It's always been my experience. Frontline employees have the best insights.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in bringing these people onto these work groups, which is generally what we'll do in the healthcare industry in particular, with children's hospitals, Boston Children's, one example, parents getting involved and feeling that they're part of the management of the experience is beyond belief. Just the insights that they have and bringing it to life in a group rather than a bunch of people that are inside trying to understand what it's like being outside the system.
Any closing thoughts on that, Bob? You know, because you got, yeah, I love this idea of finding collaborators across the organization, regardless of position or role, you know, people that have bought into it and the idea of, you brought up the importance of customer data shared across the organization. So if we truly are to get buy-in across the organization, what does that look like in terms of the participants in the process?
Well, I agree 100% on Bill's comment around that Lou mentioned about bringing human resources in, because remember, we're talking about culture and we're talking about behaviors and we're talking about talent development. And I always had, when I was running large operations, I always had the IT, finance, and HR people at the table with me every time. They were part of running the business and they were my collaborators. And we had others, but they were always at the table as business leaders, not as the heads of those individual disciplines, but as business leaders. And I think we underestimate the importance of having those people at the table to help us.
Well, I want to thank the two of you for being here today and addressing these important questions. And want to thank our audience members for sticking in and participating today. So please stay tuned for next month's webinar, which will feature additional hosts from the CXM radio network. And if you haven't already done so, please connect with us on LinkedIn. Bob, Lou, please, thank you so much for your time today. What a nice break in the middle of the week. That was fun.